Tall poppy syndrome is a term originating from Australia and New Zealand in the 1980s, and there are many different versions from around the world. The Japanese say the nail that sticks up gets hammered down, while in the Netherlands they say, don't put your head above ground level. But it all amounts to the same thing, and if you're a woman, you might feel doubly anxious to keep quiet and maintain the status quo. Otherwise, you risk isolation and othering. Hello, I'm Sally Aneri, and welcome to Fearless Forward, the podcast that asks leaders how they face their fears. Today, I'm in conversation with a woman who's leading a cultural revolution that's transforming how women see themselves and their place in the world. Lauren Currie is the founder of UPFRONT, an organisation on a mission to increase confidence, visibility and power for 1 million women. Over the past 5 years, through its signature programs called The Bond, UPFRONT has upskilled over 11,000 women across the globe in confidence, leadership and speaking up in situations where they might otherwise have stayed silent. Lauren's extraordinary journey began in Scotland, where she grew up. Straight out of university with a degree in product design, she co-founded We Are Snook, which became one of the UK's leading service design agencies. She went on to become managing director of the innovative global change agency Nobel Collective. Other roles have included chairing the charity Pregnant Then Screwed, being a trustee of the UK's Design Council, and director of service design for the Good Lab, a 3-year collaborative project to design new ways for charities to fund their work. In 2017, her huge contributions to design and diversity were recognised by the UK government awarding her the OBE, a rare accolade for someone who was still only 30. Since then, there's been no let-up in the pace of her work and the expansion of her many activities. Lauren now lives in Uppsala in Sweden with her partner and their young son. She continues to speak internationally on leadership, confidence and building inclusive cultures, and to support innovative startups with investment and advice. Her first book, The Trick, helps adults have open, inclusive conversations with children and young people about the patriarchy. Lauren's success is founded on her understanding that confidence, like leadership, is not necessarily something you're born with and is something you can learn. We dig into that in this conversation, and we explore her own struggles, trials, setbacks, rejections along the way, and how she's transformed them into a source of inspiration for so many other women.
A couple of weeks ago, I was on a flight and I found a file in my laptop from 7 years ago where I had written a list of all the things that I was scared of. And it was obviously an experience to reread that list from where I am now. And then I also wrote a new list of all the things that I'm scared of now. And I decided to share the list that I found from 7 years ago with my community online, because I think it's really easy for people to look at women like me who work in the open, who have achieved success in inverted commas in different ways and different things, and think, oh, it's easy for her, she's got it all figured out. Whereas the truth is, I think everybody is, or certainly for me, I am always working hard to unlearn and to let go of limiting beliefs. And I think there was 27 fears that I'd written down. So I won't get them all out for you, but for example, there was a lot of them about my idea of what a successful person looked and sounded like and what success was. So I used to think that, nobody who succeeds has to think this deeply about it. You shouldn't have to force it. You shouldn't have to be strategizing and asking for help and reading the books and doing all this work to try and figure it out. Like, if it was meant to happen, if you were good enough, it would just be happening by itself.
And how did that work out?
Well, it's complicated, isn't it? Because I do think that luck and privilege do play a role in these things. And I do think there is such a thing as an overnight success, even though it's very, very rare. But I think for the majority of us, it's a long, long hustle. People might look at my Instagram and see the shiny posts and see the 14,000 followers, but they don't see the 15 years that I was posting and blogging, when for a long time it was only my mum that noticed what I was writing or what I was saying. Certainly for me, how I think about it now is it does require patience and strategy and a lot of reflection. I don't think things just happen.
So, how do you define success? I mean, what does success mean to you?
I think for me, success is about freedom, and that freedom shows up in different ways. So, one of the most important ways I want freedom and have freedom is my time. So, because I choose to run my own business, I also choose to run my business with my partner, who I have a family with, and we have our son together. And so that means that Chris and I pick our son up from school every day together. And we were trying to talk to him recently to help him see that that's really rare and quite special. Most kids don't get both mum and dad coming to the school every day. And that's a really intentional choice that we've made. So, because it's our company and I decide how I spend my time, it means that I can pick my son up from school every day. I can put him to bed every night. Last weekend, we went to London for the long weekend as a family. And, we don't have to ask anybody's permission. We don't have to tell anybody that we're doing that. So that freedom is important, and I want more of it, of course. I also think financial freedom is a big goal that I have. I want to earn enough so that my family and my son's family in the future can choose to work on the things that they want to work on, and say yes to opportunities and say yes to their curiosity without stress and pressure of, how are we going to pay this bill? Can we afford to do this or not? So I think those two things feel important. But ultimately it's about living a life that is aligned with my values, living a life that I feel and believe that my granddaughter's granddaughter will be proud of.
So, really listening to what matters most to you and aligning your choices and your actions to that is how you feel successful.
Yeah. Like being a person who walks the talk and practices what they preach. That's feedback that I get a lot, and it's feedback that feels really important to me.
So, that's been a journey that will continue to evolve. But looking then at that list of, was it 27 fears that you wrote 7 years ago that you came across, sharing it or some of them with your community, and then writing a list again of those that you fear today. Were there many parallels?
I think the 90% of them are very different, and some of them are almost laughable because, for example, there was a lot around brand building, and you shouldn't need a personal brand. People should just know who you are because your work's really good. And of course, now I have built whole products and services around that, teach other women how to build their personal brands. So many of them were, I could imagine going through with a red felt marker, being like, tick, 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 tick. But I think the themes that were still present were themes around fear of isolation and loneliness and kind of othering. I think it's a consequence, particularly for women who are very ambitious and want to do big, bold, brave things in the world. Like, the world is not kind to confident women. The world is not kind to ambitious women. And it can be a lonely place. And that has been my experience and so far. And that is a fear that I have about the future. It's something that I'm working really intentionally around, on how to build a support network and how to really nourish the friendships that I do have, that are very precious and important to me. and being much more boundaried when I build new friendships with new people, because I think my kind of extrovert, very excitable entrepreneur personality, when I meet a new person who I love, I get like, let's do things together, let's write books, let's make things, let's create magic. And, that's not always the right path for every partnership. So I'm learning just to try and dial that down and think about what I need from the different people in my life.
I think you said something like, the world isn't kind. Can you tell me, if you don't mind, a little bit more about your experience of your experience of it not being kind, your personal experience of the work not being well received?
Well, I think it's something that most of your listeners who are women will really connect with. Because for me, I have memories from my childhood, certainly very strong memories from school, of learning quite quickly that people were going to like me less the more I achieved. So, for example, I remember one of my teachers telling my parents at parents' evening that I was trying to hide my cleverness. So I'd stopped putting my hand up, stopped answering questions, because I was getting signals that that was not well received by the group, particularly other girls in the group. So that's one example and one memory I have. I think there's also themes of, I'm extroverted. I love performing. I love being on stage. When I was young, I danced, I played piano, I loved the spotlight, love attention. And that was nurtured and encouraged by my kind of nuclear family. But from the wider world, it was this kind of, don't be a show off. She's too big for her boots. Who does she think she is? So you start to get these messages of the world prefers me when I am quiet and small, right through to my 20s, where I would be dating, and as soon as the guy I was dating would Google me and see my work and my business, which at that time was nothing to do with gender equality, was a more traditional innovation consultancy. And, then I would never hear back from them. And I had people saying, just pretend pretend you've got a 9 to 5, pretend you're a nurse, pretend you're a primary school teacher.
Okay. And did you follow that advice?
No, but I did consider it, which, breaks my heart now to say that out loud. So it's been a message of, this is not how we do things here. And I think especially the west coast of Scotland has a very particular flavour of who does she think she is mentality. And it's one of the reasons why I left Scotland. And ironically, now, 15 years later, I'm desperate to move back to Scotland, which is interesting. But yeah, I think there's lots and lots of moments of my life and I now understand that those moments have informed how I have built UPFRONT, and are part of the reason why UPFRONT has had the success that it's had, is because I have built the community and told the story and shared the narrative that I needed to hear then and that I need to hear now, which is why I wear a badge that says, may our confidence upset them. It's like I am at peace now with the fact that my confidence upsets people. That is the way of the world. It's sad and it's depressing and it's infuriating, but it's true. And all of the data tells us it's true. And how do we change that? Well, I believe that large scale behaviour change is just individual behaviour change en masse, right? So if I can mobilise millions of women, which is the path that we're on, to think differently about their own confidence, to be much more aware of their reaction to other women's confidence, then that's how you start to change these narratives. Because I know from my peers who have young children, that there's still such a fear of, how do I raise a girl that will speak up for herself and be confident but not upset anybody and not be arrogant? Like, that's still the dominant question. And I don't see mums stressing themselves out asking that question about raising boys, because we've been so conditioned to believe that arrogance is the worst possible fate for a woman. And I'm fascinated by that.
Yes, and I want to dig into that a lot more. Before we get there, what I'm hearing and what you're saying about your experience is that the people around you felt threatened by the way you showed up. And so, as you have realized, it was never about you, it was about them. So, how do you take care of that though? Because, in relationship, in interrelationship with others, when we think about our self awareness having two parts, what we understand about ourselves and what we understand about how others see us. And I guess to move forward in a helpful way, if I can put it that way, we have to take account of both. That's my belief, right? That's my experience. So how do you balance that, Lauren? Not quietening yourself, but at the same time, if you like, understanding how they feel, misplaced though it may be in your view, nevertheless, understanding that that's how they feel.
I think it's about understanding that there's something about my behaviour or how I've shown up that has triggered something in them. And that is totally out of my control. And they will make up stories about what that means. And they will make up stories about me around what that means. And that is also totally out of my control. So, how I see it is, by showing up, yes, that negative trigger might occur in someone, but there will be 100 triggers that positively show up in 100 other people. And so, really, that is the only way to keep going, because if you show up solely focused on, I must avoid this negative trigger, first of all, you can't. It doesn't matter what you do. I could show up at half mast for the next 10 years and there will still be people who are upset. So you've set yourself an impossible task. And even in trying to achieve that task, you are taking that gift away from all the other women who will be inspired, encouraged, delighted by your spark, by your light, by your confidence, by your joy. I do think that we need to have a conversation about internalized misogyny. I think that we've come so far in having language and models and intellectual understanding of gender equity and intersectionality and feminism and how these things show up at work and how these structures operate. But we are missing the piece about the role that we play in these structures that we want to change. The role that women play in tearing each other down and gossiping and bitching and cancelling people, whatever that looks like. And I feel like that's the next phase of this conversation for me. That's definitely the conversation we're having up front right now. Somebody asked me a really good question recently, which was, if you were to start up front today from scratch, what would its focus be? Because I started up front nearly 10 years ago. It's like 9 years and 6 months or something. And back then, we hadn't had the Me Too movement. We hadn't had the Black Lives Matter movement. Trump was not president. It was a very, very different world. And if I was to start up front today, immediately, instinctively, I know the focus would be internalized misogyny. Now, do I think that would be sensible for a business? No, because, this is something that's followed me throughout my entrepreneurial journey, as all of my businesses have been on the edges of new disciplines or new questions. And I think that's an incredibly positive thing for creating change and sparking conversation and building movements, but it's not particularly great when you're trying to build a profitable business that can sustain itself and sustain a team. So do I think it would be a smart business move? Probably not. But I do think that that is the missing piece of the conversation. And it's very uncomfortable. It's a big ask to ask women to do the hard work of really looking at themselves and looking at what does come up for you when you see somebody and you think, who does she think she is? Like, where does that come from?
But isn't it part of the human spirit of competition that then manifests negatively to judge and criticize others who feel like some kind of threat to your own path, whatever that may be? And I wonder if that isn't at least a part of it that is universal.
I think there's elements of competition that are universal for sure, but like the core of this idea of women hating on other women is a consequence of the patriarchy, which oppresses women. It absolutely also harms men and boys, of course, but I think it's driven by a scarcity narrative. It's driven by there's only room for one woman at the top of this organization. There's only room for one woman who sounds like X to achieve Y. And therefore, you must fight each other to get that place. That scarcity narrative does not exist for men because there is an abundance of opportunities for men if we are talking about particularly about white men. So I think the abundance and scarcity difference is a huge part of it. And even just looking at the media, we see constantly our media pitting female celebrities against each other, encouraging readers to take sides, whether it's Taylor Swift and Beyonce or Nicola Sturgeon and Angela Merkel or whoever it is they decide to do that with. They don't do that with men in the same way.
A successful woman is something to be admired and feared, perhaps.
I don't know if admired. I think definitely feared because of the power that they hold. So the status quo doesn't want, the system is working exactly how it's designed to work. The status quo needs women to remain complacent and silent and unquestioning.
So internalized misogyny may not be, in its essence, a brilliant business case, but can certainly form a part of the work that you do and now you want to focus on. As you turn your attention to this, what feels like a missing link in your work, how are you doing that? Where are you starting with that?
Well, I'm starting through conversations like this one. So, I do a lot of keynoting and workshopping and speaking on different podcasts. And so I'm starting to, raise these questions, raise these ideas. I've also written a book which will be coming out in January 2026. And I know that by the
Congratulations.
time, thank you. I know that by the time this airs, that will be public knowledge. So that's exciting. And there's a whole chapter in my book about how we can shift our mindset to see confident women as invitations and glimmers of what's possible rather than threats. So, in short, I think it's about conversation, it's about dialogue, because there isn't one easy, simple answer. This is the work of a lifetime.
There never is. And that's where sometimes I think, in my experience, the problem may occur is when we think it's simple. And of course it isn't. It's highly complex, highly nuanced. I thought you were going to talk about the book that you'd written for parents.
Yeah, well, that's also part of how we're doing it. So that's a children's book called Taylor Meets the Trick, and it's a way for children. It's a way for parents to talk to their children and the grown-ups around them about the patriarchy. And Taylor Meets the Trick is inspired by my son, who is 7 and has long blonde curly hair, nearly down to his waist now. So often gets mistaken for a girl. And I read in Robert Webb's book, How to Be a Boy, that his daughter, I think she was 4 at the time, couldn't quite get her tongue around the word patriarchy, and so it came out as the trick. And he said, "Oh, it is a trick because it's tricking us. It's making us think that there's rules for boys and rules for girls." And so I read that book when my son was 2, and started talking to him about the trick and started talking about it online and talking to my community. And it's just such a very powerful concept that we've now kind of built upon and developed. And in the book, we've got resources and tools for teachers and parents and families to try and bring this language into their everyday of how are we being tricked. And, when you watch a movie together, at the end of the movie, it's like, okay, where did we see the trick? Because now when someone calls my son a girl, which happened multiple times in London over the weekend, rather than him absorbing that as shame or anxiety, it's immediately that person's been tricked, because they don't know that boys can have long hair and girls can have short hair, and anybody can have the hair that they want to have because there's no rules. So our vision is that we are creating a series of trick books tackling different ways the trick shows up. So the next one is about a young girl called Olivia who wants to play football, or who does love playing football, and her dad has been tricked and keeps telling her that football's for boys. And so there will be a book in that series about a young girl who is constantly being told that she's showing off and she's bossy.
So you're challenging deep-seated generational beliefs around what it is to be a girl or a boy, a man or a woman. I heard you say there are no rules. How wonderful to be in a world with no rules around that stuff. Just show up as you are, right? And be accepted. Wouldn't that be amazing? And so this is you playing your part in that. And the other book, I just want to make sure that our listeners hear the title of it. Tell me again.
Yes. My other book is called Be Upfront.
And so you've been quiet about that, haven't you? Or at least I've not seen much about that.
Yeah, it's not been announced yet.
Cool. Well, congratulations on that as well. So a lot of work going forward, Lauren. And as we're sitting here talking today, what are you still afraid of?
I think my biggest fear is always not fulfilling my potential or being mediocre.
How do you decide that? How do you judge that? How do you know?
And I've realized that that's also part of why I'm so driven to build a business that activates women to take action, because there are several people in my life who I love very, very much, who are musicians, artists, who have not been able to express their creativity in their life. And that just is a tragedy for me. So I want to make sure that I myself do all the things I know I'm capable of doing and more, and that in doing that work, I activate and encourage others to do the same. So this year, my focus has been writing. So, we've self-published my children's book. I've have my first non-fiction book being published, and I intend to write many more children's books and non-fiction books. I also want to write a novel, which I have an idea for, but have been far too scared to
Oh,
put.
really?
It's been an interesting exercise, because in all other areas of I was going to say professional life, but and my personal life, it's like I ran a marathon, I did stand-up comedy, I learned to swim in freezing lakes. Like, I am good at doing things that feel scary, because this is my job, right? This is what I spend all my time thinking about and talking about. But there is something about the act of creative writing that I just have a complete block. And it's a really interesting kind of meta experience, because I can feel myself being like, oh, it's going to be rubbish and nobody will read it, and nobody likes it, and you're no good. And I'm like, oh, this is funny. This is interesting. But to me, that's like a big red flashing arrow saying, well, you're going to have to do this now. This is what you do next if it feels this scary. So I kind of get a buzz out of out of that situation. It's like, feels exciting to me to be playing in a space that makes me feel uncomfortable. And I guess the fear is, what would happen if I somehow never found myself in that kind of space again? That would feel really scary to me.
Oh, nothing more to learn, nothing more to challenge.
And of course, that's impossible. So we're all good.
We're all good. There's always going to be something, right? Sometimes something apparently trivial can trip us up, can't it? I remember some years ago now, we were talking about you perhaps coming to the Alps, right? And I remember you saying, but I don't like the cold. And the next thing I know, you're plunging yourself into a freezing. And I'm like, what? And I did smile to myself. I thought, okay, she decided she was going to do something about that. So I'd like to talk a little bit about, if I may, about this creative writing idea. You mentioned you'd had an idea. Are you prepared to share with us what that idea is, or is that a secret for now?
So ultimately, is a love story and a story of potential. And my protagonist is a very driven artist who has made a decision that falling in love is too big a risk and will distract her from fulfilling her potential. And then she bumps into Gary Barlow. That is Gary Barlow when he was very young and he's not famous. And so she's the only person who knows that he's Gary Barlow. And they fall in love, and she has to decide, will she stay in this love with him and risk, he will never become the Gary Barlow that we all love and cherish, or not? And this story came to me in a dream. I dreamt this so vividly, and I woke up and wrote it all down, and I thought it was hilarious because it's Gary Barlow. And when I shared it with my partner and my friends, they just thought it was so great. They were like, oh my God, you have to write this. And I also am drawn to it because it feels light and playful, which a lot of my work does not.
Because it's quite a universal theme, isn't it? This idea that, deep, deep unconditional love is incompatible with success, that you'll somehow get lost in it and lose your ambition or something. I mean, it's a sort of perennial question in that sense, and not to make it all serious again, because you want it to be light and lovely, but, there is that theme, isn't there, that human theme. So, Lauren, there's a lot going on. You're forever evolving, developing so many ideas and a very strong sense of direction. Do you see any kind of, I don't want to say end game, that sounds a bit final, but a sort of an outcome, a solution, a goal?
Yeah, I don't know if I see a particular end point. If I get my way, I'll still be launching things and writing books and building campaigns when I'm a very old lady. I guess my hope is that the path becomes freer, like we talked about at the start of the conversation. So my work enables me to have more time and more wealth, and that will activate even more creativity for myself and for others.
And you talked about, your grandchildren's grandchildren, the sense of legacy in that. What I'm hearing is that it's as if, certainly perhaps in your family, I don't mean to suggest for one moment that, your family had different ideas to you or anything like that, but it's almost as if you're saying it stops here. From now on, this is how it's going to be.
Yeah, I think I have built a life that is very, very different to the life that I had growing up, and very different to the lives that I was kind of exposed to and that my parents have been exposed to. I think I have an incredible family who are very loving and very supportive, but they are also, sheltered's not the right word, limited by circumstance. And I'm the first in my family to go to university and first in my family to live abroad. And they are incredibly, incredibly proud of me. I think some of it makes them uncomfortable at times, but I think that's probably because of those trigger moments that it brings up for them and questioning decisions that they made along the way. But ultimately, they are incredibly proud and incredibly supportive. And I'm really, really grateful for that every day, because I know that not everybody has that, and it's a really precious thing.
Yes, absolutely. That they can get past whatever, dare I say, limiting beliefs, that we all have, but often through circumstance and experience, whatever that is, they can get past it and really see you and what you're trying to do in the world and support it.
And they're also often really in it with me. It's like their garage is full of all of our conference banners, and my mum's been posting early copies of my children's book to people. My dad helped us post all the Christmas gifts that we sent to people. They're always there when I ask.
So, Lauren, when you look forward into your life, the life ahead, and who knows, right? But you have a plan, you have a direction. What does fearless forward mean to you?
I don't ever want to be fearless. And I think that's a myth of sorts. I think fear is a really healthy, natural part of being human. And what I am trying to master and want to continue mastering is to always do the thing despite the fear, and to live a life where my curiosity is always 1 millimeter, even if it's just 1 millimeter bigger than the fear.
And that is gold, isn't it? That's what it's all about. Lauren Currie, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Sally Ann.
What stood out for me in this conversation was Lauren's clarity, both about her mission to empower women and the lessons of her experience. Lauren has come to see her fears, for example, around visibility and taking up space, not as something to eliminate, but as information, a sign that something matters. Our fears are not there to stop us, but to point us towards what's worth doing. Lauren has learned to value her own energy and to set boundaries that protect it. She stopped giving time to things that don't align with her values and has become more intentional about how and where she shows up. At the heart of all this is a belief in the power of community, not just for support, but for change. She's seen what happens when women are given the space to be seen and heard, and she's made it her mission to create more of those spaces. Confidence, says Lauren, doesn't mean the absence of fear, and confidence can be built by doing those scary things again and again until we conquer our own response without constraint. In other words, notice what you're afraid of, question the stories behind it, and choose how you want to show up. Thank you for listening. Fearless Forward is edited and produced by Mark Steadman. I'll be back with you in 2 weeks for our next conversation about how leaders have faced their fears. To be sure of catching it, go to fearlessforward.org or subscribe to my weekly bulletin at skillfulleaders.com.